Racism, a word that carries centuries of division, hatred, and pain. But have you ever stopped to think, what if racism itself is a mental illness? Today, we'll explore this idea from multiple perspectives: spiritual, scientific, emotional, and just plain common sense. Let's begin. 1. The spiritual perspective. At its core, racism is a complete separation from truth and love. Most spiritual traditions teach that all human beings are connected, that we are one. But racism is the illusion of separation. It blinds a person from seeing others as reflections of themselves. It is fear-based. And fear, as many spiritual teachers say, is the opposite of love. A racist mind operates on fear, fear of differences, fear of change, fear of losing control. But this fear distorts reality, creating division where there should be unity. At its root, racism is the ego in overdrive. It thrives on superiority and control, the very things that keep people disconnected from their higher selves. True spiritual enlightenment teaches humility, compassion, and love for all. Racism is the opposite of enlightenment. It's spiritual blindness. And then there's karma. Every action has consequences. Hate breeds suffering. Not just for the oppressed, but for the oppressor. A racist person carries that weight, that burden of negativity deep within their soul. The result? A spirit consumed by its own sickness. 2. The scientific and psychological perspective. Now let's talk science. Psychology has long recognized distorted patterns of thinking, things like paranoia, obsessive thoughts, and cognitive rigidity. Racism is built on these distortions. Think about it. A racist believes in generalizations. All people from this group are like this. That's called overgeneralization, a known cognitive distortion. They also engage in confirmation bias, only seeking out information that supports their beliefs while ignoring anything that contradicts them. This is exactly how delusions work. And in extreme cases, racism mimics symptoms of paranoia. Racists believe that certain groups are secretly plotting against them, stealing their jobs, or threatening their way of life. This irrational fear is strikingly similar to delusional disorders. There's also the compulsive nature of racism. Many racists obsessively reinforce their beliefs, constantly searching for evidence that confirms their bias. This resembles obsessive-compulsive tendencies. And let's not forget how racism is passed down, like trauma. Studies show that fear-based thinking can be inherited, much like PTSD. Racism is often nothing more than generational trauma masquerading as tradition. 3. The emotional and psychological perspective. Now let's talk about the emotional and psychological toll of racism. Not just on its victims, but on the racists themselves. At the heart of racism lies deep-seated insecurity. The need to feel superior often comes from personal inadequacy. When a person lacks self-worth, they seek power over others. It's a psychological defense mechanism. And then there's suppressed rage. Hate doesn't come from nowhere. It is often the result of unprocessed pain. Racists direct their frustration outward, blaming entire groups for their personal struggles. This emotional dysfunction leads to a severe lack of empathy. Racists struggle to see others as fully human. This is not just ignorance, it is emotional immaturity, a stunted ability to connect with others on a fundamental level. And like any addiction, racism is self-reinforcing. Hate produces a rush, an illusion of power. But over time, that high fades, leaving only bitterness and isolation. The racist mind becomes trapped in its own negativity, unable to escape the cycle. 4. The common sense perspective. Now let's just use common sense. Racism is irrational at every level. First, it's scientifically false. Genetic studies confirm that all humans are 99.9% identical. Race is a social construct. The idea of racial superiority is pure fiction. Second, racism is historically self-destructive. Every racist ideology has collapsed under its own weight. Societies that embrace diversity thrive. Societies that embrace racism stagnate. Third, racism requires effort to maintain. It's exhausting. Think about it. Racists have to actively avoid certain people, justify their beliefs, and constantly reassure themselves that their prejudice is correct. If a belief system requires that much reinforcement, it's probably built on a lie. And finally, it isolates people. Racists cut themselves off from the world, limiting their experiences, relationships, and personal growth. That's not strength, that's weakness.